everybody. This is Science Bridge webinar series. You can do it. And today I'm very excited about our guest because our guest is Brett Thompson. And that will switch our gears a bit because Brett doesn't have a background in science. But Brett is the co-founder of Credence Institute, co-founder of and CEO of Mzansi's Meat, and co-creator of Discourse ZA. He studied finance and economics at the University of Cape Town and Stellenbosch University in South Africa. After completing his honors thesis, making an economic case for vegetarianism, he went on to work for the Fry family food, one of the world's leading manufacturer of plant-based meat alternatives and dairy-free food. Brett is passionate about effecting positive change and has been a spokesperson for Meat-Free Mondays and Veganuary South Africa. He has held senior positions at Beyond Carnism and ProVeg International, accumulating over 10 years of experience in animal advocacy. So thank you so much, Brett, for agreeing to have this chat with me today. I'm very excited because I mentioned to you that you're not a scientist, but you're actually leading now one of the major startups in South Africa, the hot topic of artificial meat. So recently you just launched a product. So thank you so much for taking time from your busy schedule.
Yeah, thanks very much, Martina. Happy to be here and we'll see if I can give some insight into how does somebody who dropped science in matric eventually start working and then running a biotech company. And yeah, about 2 weeks ago, Mzansi Co, my company that I co-founded, we hit our first major milestone, which was making Africa's first cultivated beef burger. So yeah, happy to unpack all that stuff.
All of that stuff and everything else. Okay, so maybe let's start with your background. So your background is more in economics. So how did you came across this passion basically of devoting to animal activism?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would say would have been a typical South African, braai, barbecue, you know, that was what I loved doing with friends and family. And what happened was that in my third or second year at university, I picked up a few extra courses because that's what you do when you think you've got extra time. And one of them was applied ethics. And I was studying finance at the time, or economics, or whatever it was. And it was on applied ethics. And part of the topic was on eating animals and essentially why do we eat some animals and not others. And it just really, it was interesting to me. It was just a curious conversation that I hadn't really had. I always tell this to people that my mom's been vegetarian for 40 years and she never made it a thing for us, for the kids. But so I knew about this idea, but I never really explored it. And after, listening to somebody talk about it in a way that I hadn't thought about it, decided, okay, let me stop eating meat. And that kind of started a journey that I didn't expect would happen. To be honest, when I stopped eating meat 2008, 2009, I wasn't really expecting that I would be where I was now. I just thought it would be something I wanted to do, change things up. And what really did happen, especially at that stage, was people asked a lot of questions and people queried a lot of the concepts and the ideas and just, I'd be sitting at a braai or sitting at a barbecue or sitting at a table with meat everywhere else, and I chose not to eat it. And people couldn't understand why. And so it resulted in a lot of conversations, as you can imagine. Where'd you get your protein from is the first question that people ask you. And after several years, I was finishing up started doing my master's, and I thought, well, let me put some of this knowledge that I'd gained personally through these numerous discussions and debates over beers until all hours of the night about how our treatment of animals, particularly when it comes to food. And I wrote a thesis, which was my honors thesis on an economic case for vegetarianism. I was studying at the Stellenbosch University doing economics. So that kind of conversation was very new to them. They hadn't had somebody come out and say, well, let's look at economics amongst not eating meat. They're obviously far more focused on the consumption through agriculture, and it did pretty well, did okay, and that led me to getting a job at Fry's, as you mentioned earlier, Fry Family Foods, the food company based out of Durban that was looking at meat alternatives based out of vegetable proteins. And I'll probably stop there and let you jump in if there's interest. But that was how I got involved in food 10 odd years ago, when it wasn't at the same sort of level of discussion that we have now. You didn't have these massive companies that had sort of moved the needle quite considerably like they've done in the last 3-5 years.
Yes, that's true. And I think you say that you started in 2008, if I'm correct. So that
Correct.
was still not the hippie trend that it's now, and
no,
it's so big and blooming.
Then it was very much like a niche hippie thing, and now it's like
maybe
you've got it is still seen as sort of outside of the norm, I'd guess, but it's definitely reimagined itself. The industry, alternative proteins now are far more acceptable. I'm based in Woodstock in Cape Town, and I live on the Atlantic seaboard side, and every cafe there has got a plant-based milk option. Sometimes they're the same price of this. So I think it's changed drastically. I think there's a much bigger industry. It's more mature than it was 10-15 years ago, when I was speaking to people that pick and pay buyers or retail buyers, and the reception and the perception was a lot different to what it is now.
Yes, so basically that aspect of your career development, it was part of your passion. So you kind of used your passion to create your career path. Is that the correct way of putting it?
I guess it's pretty accurate. I was passionate about the conversation, about getting involved with it, and then I think trying to do it in the most effective way, which then became more about how to be pragmatic opposed to passionate. And I think a lot of people, from what I can see, is get involved in industries, whether it's alternative protein, whether it's sustainable energy, and they go about it with quite a lot of vigor and passion, which I think is needed, but you burn out pretty quickly.
Yes.
I think if you're trying to disrupt an industry that's as settled as agriculture or fossil fuels, you've got to see it as a long-termist approach. And I think passion was important to get me here in the beginning. And then I think the only reason I continued was pragmatism with a deal of passion. I love what I do. I'm one of those people that gets to say, I don't think I've ever worked. I've never had a job. I've kind of just felt like I've done what I wanted to do. I think that's got its benefits, but it's different. It's difficult. I think when I speak to a lot of students, and I do quite a few of these, whether it's lectures or podcasts, and I think there's this idea that you need to just be an idealist and just go. And I think that is obviously short-sighted. Just for yourself, you won't manage. And that's quite a difficult world that you're trying to find yourself in. But I think the vessel of entrepreneurship is definitely an avenue that more people should look at, opposed to saying, I want to go work in a corporate job and then work within a giant multinational and try and change the way that they do business.
True, but then starting as an entrepreneur, it's very, very difficult, and the passion that you have to keep you going, how do you translate that into actual money?
I was lucky. I think I firstly took lots of risks. So maybe it's not luck, it's chance or calculated chance. I genuinely just jumped at every opportunity that came up. People make fun of me a bit because I'm a bit of an opportunist. My mates say that. But I took on a job offer to go move to Durban. And then I took a job offer to move to Berlin that I think other people would have thought about too much, and I didn't. So that's one. This is not very good advice, but sometimes thinking too much over such big decisions, it's not going to get you an answer that you can really work with. So I think there's a sort of combination of calculated risk and then knowing when to jump into new things and knowing when to leave new things as well, because that's also something I think people struggle with. And then it was like a self-fulfilling prophecy, because I moved to Durban to get a job in the space. I wasn't going to get paid probably what I would have if I'd stuck with an economics degree. And then I started learning about the ways to like look at impact focused work to maximize my own, salary and everything. So I think those things definitely played a part. And I just did a lot of research. I from about 2013 to 2016, I just dedicated my time to looking outside of just my job, but how do you work on influencing large groups of people to look at something alternative, such as meat alternatives at that stage. So I think if I had to break it down to 2 or 3 elements of success, it was the calculated risk, kind of bit of obsession with a topic, which I think you have to have. And mine's always been food and food systems, and then kind of being pragmatic at the same time, because you have to make a salary at the end of the day,
Yes,
and then see what happens.
But so how did you land the opportunity in Berlin? How did that happen?
A lot of to be honest, I don't often know how these things come about. I just sort of stumble into them and I go with it. But really, how it had happened was part of the research that I'd done. I'd come across a guy by the name of Tobias Leonhardt, and he's involved in effective altruism, which is a movement about doing as much good as possible in non-profit spaces, really, and then also talking about strategies for talking about plant-based foods. And there was another woman by the name of Melanie Joy, who's well-known social psychologist, who's coined some of the terminology behind why we eat some animals and not others. So through that research, came across them and said, please come to South Africa as part of the non-profit work that I was doing in South Africa. They spent a bit of time here and I connected with them, and they were based out of Berlin and said, do you want to take on an opportunity in Berlin? So I didn't really think much, and I quit my job at Fry's, and even though I loved it there, and they, I think, were quite happy with me, but I just needed to try those new things. And I think there's also something about being able to take on some of the unknown and just jump into these things. I think that's a trait that does align itself with some of this work. And then I spent 2 years in Berlin, and that's where I had known about. I'd been involved in food for 10 odd years, not roughly about that since then, and then at that stage rather. And I then started looking and meeting people that had been working in cultivated meat. So it was just by chance that these people were coming in, because the organization I was working for was called ProVeg International, and they had an incubator. And they were bringing in all these new ideas and people together to try and give them funding and get them to a space that they could launch a business. And that's kind of when I first was a bit apprehensive about the entrepreneurship mindset, because I felt a lot of them were just kind of winging it, if I could say. But then I started meeting people that were working in cultivated meat, and then going and actually looking at their facilities. And I think a step back is to maybe another answer or point to your question, is getting close to these ecosystems is important, because they exist. They exist here where I am in BioCity in Cape Town. But getting around other people that are working on problems and then finding your own inspiration to start solving your own, I think that's an incredibly difficult, a great idea. And Cape Town is a good place, but there's a lot of other places around the world, and probably in South Africa as well, where you can get associated, get close to people that are looking at problems and wanted to solve them with biotech and equivalents, and then learn from them, and then make the jump. You don't have to make it on your own.
That's true. So you're based in the incubator, like biotechnology incubator. So can you tell us like how you came about co-founding a company, finding a team, finding money to even join the incubator? How does it work from the start?
It's difficult. I really want that. When people ask me, I say that it's not an easy journey, but it's definitely the most rewarding journey that you will go on. I think, and once you start doing it, it's very difficult. You make yourself unemployable, because you can't go back to getting a job, in my opinion. Like, you go down this journey and you're just like, that's it. And you just realize, oh, there's such a different world out there. And so how it started was I came back from Berlin and I took 6 months off. Didn't really know what I wanted to do, and traveled and kind of ran out of money and that whole scenario. Came back to Cape Town, and I had connected with somebody who had been, through my advocacy work, who'd also been interested in cultivated meat. His name is Jay, and he was my former business partner with Mzansi, and he had a very technical background. Well, he knew more of the technical than I did, which is probably not a lot than me, but he had a clear understanding. He had taught himself a lot over a number of years, and that was the starting point. So you had two guys that kind of had strong business backgrounds, one maybe on the more sales and marketing, and the other on the more technical aspects, operational components. We then, after doing quite a bit of research through my nonprofit Credence Institute, which you mentioned, Credence is the research think tank, still going and doing a lot of great work in animal advocacy in the rest of Africa, outside of South Africa. We did a bit of research together on cultivated meat with my organization and him. And after finding out that there was just this massive white space, this blank canvas, which no one had started looking at this in Africa. And when that opportunity sort of presented itself, we said, we've got to kick this in or try this out rather, and see if we can start a cultivated meat company in Africa. Because about 2019, there was no one, and then we started and we were the first. And that really was just before we hit lockdown. So we hit lockdown, we start this company, we bring on a couple of people that, one of the next people to come was now my co-founder, Tasneem Karodia, and she's got a finance and managerial background. But we needed to go and bring in a team because we had a business unit that was strong, and now we needed to get scientists. And that's when you've got a limited budget and you've got people that are academics, it's quite difficult to bring on scientists to kind of take on this journey with you. But we've managed to do that. And the key thing that had started this all was getting those right people to kind of agree upon the direction and the vision. What did you want to achieve over the next 2, 5, 10 years? And then funding. We had, I've been working in the space for 10, 15 years. So I've made a lot of decent networks and we had a pretty broad network base. And we were able to connect with the Good Food Institute in a very practical, just a very good way, let's say. If anyone's listening to the show, I think that's definitely, well, listening to me rather, I'm sure people listen to your show. But our engagement with the Good Food Institute just laid the groundwork. So there are these incubators that I'm talking about now, but there are also other industry bodies and non-profits that are helping entrepreneurs get into the space. So there isn't an excuse for someone who's listening and saying, I don't know where to start. I can tell you there's too much information about where to start. You will find it there. And then once you've connected through those systems, we went to the Good Food Institute, and then they gave us a contact, and his name was Ryan Bethencourt. And Ryan Bethencourt is a prolific investor from the States. He's invested in 140 startups across the world. He loves emerging markets. He was interested in Africa, but hadn't seen anyone starting to work in the space. And we were struggling to kind of get South African investors interested in this because they didn't understand what we were doing. And American investors and foreign investors didn't really know if they wanted to jump into biotech in Africa when there wasn't really, or cellular agriculture in Africa when there wasn't anyone to kind of showcase as a proof of concept. He threw a check at us, and that's how the company started. It gave us enough time to bootstrap. We got into the BioCity Incubator program November 2020, and we've been with them ever since. We built a great relationship with them. They understand our needs, and we've been able to sort of tailor-make and work with them to develop a lab that is suited for cultivated meat. It's not something that you can just press play on. You kind of need to work with that. So it was a lot of partnership development is maybe the best way to describe some of this. Understanding that there's a lot of resources available that you can find, you have to utilize and be smart about how you approach that. And knowing that networking is the way to do it. So it was at that stage because of COVID, a lot of virtual engagement after engagement, a lot pitches and pitches and pitches. And eventually it took one person to throw a relatively small check. Dollars go a long way in South Africa. Sure. That gave us some runway. And we've been going at it ever since.
Yes, absolutely. With the recent success with launching the actual burger. So how long did this whole process of setting up the lab and getting the scientists on board to getting to that milestone get? About 2 years, but
Yeah, so well, 2 years technically, but I mean, now I actually want to start saying less than that because, well, I mean, we had 6 months of COVID, so we were, we only got into the lab in November 2020. So we were just bootstrapping and just kind of getting our strategies right and finding the right staff and the lab people. So November 2020 is when it really kicked off because we had some funding. We got some folks in the lab, the thing is within South Africa, or particularly at that stage, I think there's a lot of people in coming out of the sort of biotech academia world and going and saying, oh, there's not really an environment here for me to go and work at. So they go and work at a pharmaceutical, they go work do COVID testing as everybody was kind of doing at that stage, or leave the country. And so a lot of it, what we had to do initially from roughly then was work with academics who had expertise in marine biology and looking at certain protein expressions and looking at tissue culture was obviously what we needed, and working with people that were experts in fibroblasts and muscle repairs for sports injury. So how do we reprogram somewhat of that so that we can make muscle grow outside of an animal's body? So there was a lot of optimizing and trying to like rework a lab that also was a general lab, and we had to kind of work to go and say, well, here's our cell culture room and that type of stuff. So that took optimization from about November 2020 till our big breakthrough started happening from about the second half of last year. And then in about September of last year, we managed to secure the services of our now R&D director, Dr. Wade Edwards. So Dr. Colin Fenter had been working with us, Dr. Carl Naylor, PhDs, all of them. And we've got a few new juniors that have joined recently. And they had a variety of different skill sets, but when bringing on the expertise of Wade, let me just call him Wade, he had 20 years in the bioprocessing world, built bioreactors for vaccines and antibodies and the like. And he helped us sort of take what we were doing at a T175 flask level in an incubator, and then how do we bring that into the sort of bioreactors, into the going from 125 moles capacity upwards. Our current bioprocessing room is 100 liters. So that was very important for us to kind of get the understanding to go at a scale that would be ultimately a burger. And we achieved that probably in from about December of last year till March is when we had optimized all our processes and everything started really coming online so that we could then make a burger in a couple of months, and the next step is to get that into less than a month.
So your technology, does it use any external patent, or everything is on your license?
Everything is ours. We're looking at our own intellectual property and what we can do to work on securing some of that. But at the moment, it's nothing under license. We've developed it all in-house. We looked at all this in the beginning, and we actually look at it periodically, whether or not we should just license our technology that's been developed 5 years ago in Israel and the Netherlands and stuff, and you can't do it from a price point. Well, I guess you can if you've got lots of money, but we just found it the way that we could be competitive was developing our cell lines in-house. So that's what we've done, and we've got 5 cell lines that have been developed in-house, and we've got probably another 5 on the way. And then through whether it's our scaffolding or whether it's our bioreactor design and optimization and media development, that's all been completely in-house, it's got its challenges as well, because you are maybe reinventing some of the wheels, but I think we've stumbled across some pretty unique things in that process, particularly in the cell line development in the beginning, and now within the bioprocessing component, where we are in a far more stronger position to showcase competitive advantage to partner or potential competition in South Africa, but also, we believe abroad.
Yes, and the fact that you did it in basically what, 1.5 years, then it's fantastic, actually.
Yeah.
So now you, from the perspective of economist, actually, how you're using all of that with the combined knowledge from scientists, how that works in your company?
I think it's a good question. I think sometimes I probably don't think I draw upon my background as an economist, or at least a studied economist. I still want to go back and finish my master's, because I dropped out to get a job, but that's maybe a future plan. I think what I know is important for what we're doing is bringing. It's what we managed to pull off our burger a couple of weeks ago, putting that in front of an audience of 50 people, getting a politician, a chef, and my co-founder Taz to eat it. I mean, that is a very complex it's mixing science with technology, but with PR, with people, with, there's so many different layers to running a startup, to running a business. I think a lot of people become myopic and they say, like, I'm just going to do this, and we're going to get that over the line because we are a science company, or we are a technology, or accountants, or whatever it is. And I don't believe that's how humans work. I mean, people are very complex, and how do you get a complex range of people to go and create an output and human action? I mean, that's ultimately what we need, because in our case, we need to eat, we need to make food. So I think I bring that thought process. I think what I would like to bring more is sometimes I question quite a bit, and maybe sometimes it's a bit frustrating for my scientists, and I wink, because I hope if they do watch this, they understand. But I think you've got to go in there and just ask questions that genuinely, I'm the person who's, I'm not the smartest in the room, because there's everybody surrounding me who's got PhDs, but it's then you ask these simple questions that is like in economics just gives you that gearing, I think, a lot, and it results in like, we maybe should have thought of that, or let's introduce that into the model, or something. So I think it's that questioning idea that a curious founder should always have, in a way that is received well by your team, because they need to understand that that's the role that you need to play. That you are there to ask questions in a constructive way. And then I think that my degree enabled me to get the job, that enabled me to get the networks and the people and the contacts, so that I've got I'd query if many people in South Africa know more about alternative meat protein than me, in the broader sense. Maybe they've got some specific knowledge, but I've got a half decent broad understanding, and then applying that to a biotech company at its core, who are trying to become a food company. And we're in that process. I think the last 2 weeks ago, where we launched our burger, we've gone from being an R&D focused biotech company to moving into that food company role. And that's where I'm bringing 15 years of experience to some degree, with a backing of whether it's economics and finance, and knowing mostly also that my co-founder Taz is much better at a lot of things, and I'm like, cool, she can do that with me.
Yes, so basically I believe that all of you have been adding a lot to this puzzle that your company is, and it's quite a complicated puzzle, and lifting it off the ground, I'm sure required a lot of energy and a lot of expertise from different fields. So what does your day-to-day look like as a founder of a company?
Sure. You know what? It's always exciting, and that doesn't necessarily mean a good thing, but it's always, sometimes I'll like pull back, and I will answer the question. I take a long time to answer questions, but sometimes I'll pull back in different discussions that I'm having, whether it's at an HR level or with finance or with facilities discussion or production or R&D or whatever. And if you're looking for an interesting day-to-day that's got its challenges, but starting a startup is, all startups have got this, but then this layer of interest that is biotech, and then this layer of disrupting a food system that is established as an animal agriculture system. I mean, you can't predict, and it's just really enjoyable. And I think for people who like that, you know, get into this, and then also work with people that can also keep structure and stability and work on sort of some of the components in a silo. And I think that's the combination that I'm trying to manage. When it comes to my day-to-day, I'll give the actual, and then I'll give variations of where I'd like to improve. I think that's will hopefully be useful. I do try and meditate in the morning as the first thing with a cup of tea. I do try and get stuck into like a Wordle or something, just to kind of start the brain a little bit. I think I'd like to wake up a little bit earlier, but that's another thing. Genuinely, I try to block out my mornings. So I've kind of, it's not happening at the moment, but I do tell my team that my mornings, I don't want to get stuck into meetings. I try and avoid back-to-back meetings, because I don't think that you can actually get any work done. So after getting to the office, a cup of coffee is obviously needed, and then a bit of deep work where I try and clear out my comms channels. I mean, LinkedIn, for example, is just one of the most successful ways of us getting fundraising. So I spend a bit of time on that. I spend a time on the Slacks and knocking out a few emails, and whether it's a few social media like Twitter, which I'm also trying to be more active on. So I think it's just getting all that communication that requires more urgent attention, starting that out, and then I'll generally look at getting a bit of deep work, an hour or two before check-ins with people, and then check-ins with my co-founder, and at the moment we've only got one department, which is most of our time but we'll be with our head of R&D. So I guess that's generally what a day looks like, and then I try to have conversations with staff as well, because we're a small team. You want to kind of keep that going, even if it's just something over a coffee table. Big part of what I'm doing at the moment is fundraising. So I've got to be, that's a core focus, fundraising, speaking to investors, and then and getting the public to know about us. I think that's my core role externally. And then finally, you know, I clock out, try and keep some balance, go play squash, go for a run, go for beers with some friends. Yeah, that's probably boring. I mean, I don't know if that's a boring review, but that's a day.
No, it's actually very relevant, because I mean, how it can be boring, it's about finding that balance. And I guess entrepreneurs really struggle with that. When do you clock out? When you say, okay, I'm done with my work day, this is my time that I have to have for myself, otherwise I'm just gonna, you know, either burn out or be sick, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree. And I think also there's this martyr mindset of a lot of them, and I think, you know, some people I'm sure can do 20 hours a day and sleep on, you know, caffeine fumes, but I'm probably not one of those people, and I've got to know where my biggest returns are, and I know during the day and early morning I'm pretty damn I'm efficient, and then when it's 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, and you look at your emails and you start responding, and then you make mistakes and you copy in everybody. Yeah, we've all made these things, and I think those things start happening more. You haven't had your switch off, and you're not going to be efficient. I will think that one thing that's changed in my quite incredibly in my work life is that I think Saturday mornings is one of my most productive, and I love getting up, going to a coffee shop and working for a couple hours. That has been the change in I would have loved Saturday mornings, every Saturday morning for myself. Whereas now, when I started my own company, that's my time when I really just deep work for 2, 3, sometimes 4 hours. Yeah, I think you then look at structuring your time differently, because in the afternoons or a Thursday at 6 o'clock, are you that productive? Yeah. So.
And on Saturdays, I guess you get less calls, business calls,
Exactly.
so you can focus on
there's
your work.
Slack. That's a very good point. I mean, you clear your email out. I mean, like, I was just today I cleared my email out pretty well until Saturday morning, and then today it's filled up again. And yeah, you don't get as many emails. You just get to get those Slack messages off and scheduled and whatever, and then you can look at a spreadsheet for an hour about a budget, which I would struggle to do in normal day-to-day work.
Well, your job sounds very fascinating, and as I'm saying, the fact that you turned your passion into business, and it is biotechnology business without you actually having the biotechnology background, it's absolutely fantastic. So, do you have any like a final message for the graduates who are considering entrepreneurship, but maybe they are too afraid of, jumping?
Yeah, I think. What I say, and I say this actually to my friends, and I say this to graduates when I do speak to them and students, do it sooner. I think fail quicker than pushing it out 5, 10, 50. Your life changes drastically, and I think your ability to take 5 hits of failure are so much easier when you're younger than when you get older. And not to say that there's not a lot of successful entrepreneurs and at a 40-year-old stage who's got children and got things to worry about. But when you're in your 20s, you can just make stupid mistakes. People expect it. But then you'll be able to like jump through those eventually and then start something that becomes potentially the next next impactful thing. So I'd say one thing that I've done in my life, and I can look back now when you've asked some of these questions that you've been asking me, is that when an opportunity has come up, I've taken it immediately, and I've jumped, and it's hurt, and I've made mistakes, and it's been silly, but it's better that I didn't push it out. And I've got a lot of examples of whether it's friends or former colleagues and or the equivalent who've pushed things out, and then they look back and they can always you can always justify and always rationalize, and it's so much easier just to pick yourself up, in my opinion, and start again. And that might mean I don't like doing this. I want to get a job. I'm happy with that, which is there's nothing wrong with that. But if it's in the back of your mind, it's going to eat at you for the rest of your life. And
yes, at least try.
Yeah, just try. I've taken it to some extreme where I've just jumped every single time I've thought about it. But now I'm in a position, hopefully, that I'm at a company that I think there's going to be stability and growth going forward. And it's executing on something that I've been working on for 15 years. And I wouldn't have achieved probably where I am today if I had thought about things too much and said, no, I'd rather do this next year. You got to do it as soon as possible.
Yes, that sounds very reasonable, actually, because in our 20s, we have time to make those stupid mistakes.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, there isn't even your 20s, because when I took 6 months off, I'd a bit of burnout and traveled and ran out of money in Australia, Perth, Australia. I'll never forget. Managed to be able to come back and move in with my parents' house, and they were very accommodating. So if we maybe don't have all of that, such a luxury to have that support system, but they are there, and there are structures involved which in your 20s are far more acceptable than your 30s. I did it in my 30s. I'm not saying you should, but I'll put it out there that again, just do it as quickly as possible, and see what happens.
And interestingly enough, some of the entrepreneur development programs are actually limited by age, that you can only do it when you are quite young. So,
well, I think as a point on that, I think there's also this entrepreneurship industry that's created that you can also get sucked into. So then you can kind of keep on like, I'm going to learn about this, how to do the perfect pitch deck, and let me get all these investor networking stuff done. And then ultimately you could stay in that in several years and keep on, never actually creating a product. So I think it's good that you get kicked out and say, okay, now go out and try and do something, because that's really where the learning is, and where the chance of success. It's there's taking a pitch deck out of your thoughts and then bringing it into an execution of some sort of prototype. It's like the market is very quick to tell you whether or not it's a good idea. So yeah.
Such a Shark Tank.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the lion cage, I guess, is not
Yes.
the South African.
Well, do you have any final advice for our listeners?
No, I think my last bit is, firstly, thanks very much, Martina, for putting this together and having this sort of resource available. It's great that this stuff exists in South Africa, and I think I think there's a lot more opportunities that people think that there are. And you have a look, and if it's in biotech, whether it's following us, but checking out the resources that are available, there are plenty, and there are people like me who are always happy, within reason, to be approached and act as a quick mentor. I've done it with a few people, and so there is a lot of research out there. There's a lot of things that you can learn about. You can apply your academic knowledge to a problem. There are funds available for people fresh out of university. There is funding available just in general, and I think at the end of that, probably the biggest learning that I've said is that how important it is to find the right team, and then most importantly is the right co-founder. You can go at this alone, definitely, but I wasn't able to. I don't think I want to. And the co-founder is crucial.
Okay, well, thank you so much for this advice. I absolutely agree that finding the right co-founders is crucial for any project to work. Thank you so much for your time today, and all people from ScienceBridge are vouching for you to create the accessible meat, artificial accessible meat alternatives for all of us who like to braai, but it's different if it's a sausage from meat or if it's sausage from mushrooms. It's still different.
Definitely. I agree. I love plant-based, but there's something that meat. I mean, to end off, maybe I haven't eaten meat really well, not at all in 15 years, at least knowingly. And I ate a meat burger, cultivated meat burger, last 2 weeks ago. And I was like, yeah, this tastes delicious. I get it. So let's make more of these.
Well, looking forward to see it on the shelf in supermarkets.
Soon.
Fingers crossed. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.